Welcome to HR Disruptors. My name is Jeff Bounds, and I am the Chief Revenue Officer here at Predictive HR. And I am so excited about doing this LinkedIn Live series because we truly are disruptors here at Predictive HR. And for those of you that are not familiar with us, we are a consulting firm. But not only that, we are focusing on the three core pillars to ensure success with your HR software, with that being professional services, our patented data integrity engine, and also our predictive analytics platform that is labeled Executive Lens. So anyhow, enough of that, but I am super excited today because my guest is going to wow you on something that's very, very important, I believe, in our space today, and that is around mental health. So I want to introduce you to Nidhi Tiwari. Nidhi, say hello to everyone here on LinkedIn.
Hi, thank you so much, Jeff, for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Nidhi Tiwari. I'm a workplace consultant and well-being keynote speaker, and I help organizations and leaders to prioritize well-being and mental health in the workplace in order to create an environment where people belong and perform at their highest potential. I've helped to transform culture at organizations like Godiva, NPR, McCain Foods. I had the honor of presenting at TED Women last year. And so I'm just so excited to dive in and to share some knowledge and answer some questions.
Absolutely. And I got to tell you, I was really wowed by Nidhi's content on LinkedIn. And we're going to talk about neurodivergence today. And it's something when I saw it, the first time, I was like, oh, I got to find out more about this. And then when I understood really what it entailed, I'm like, okay, the audience needs to know about it. Another fun fact, we also went to the same college, Virginia Commonwealth University. So shout out to all of our fellow Rams on there.
Go
So
Rams.
anyhow, let's tell the audience what is neurodivergence and why is it so important? Why is this essential today in the workplace?
Sure, absolutely. Well, neurodivergence is essentially saying that some people's brains are wired a little bit differently than those who may be considered neurotypical. And the reason why neurodivergence is such an important topic for leaders to be aware of is because 15 to 20% of the world's population is neurodivergent, which means that within your own workplace, there will be people who have a condition that's going to fall underneath the neurodivergence umbrella. When we typically think about this concept of neurodivergence, we maybe go to the idea of autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities. But neurodiversity, as you can see from this slide, is actually a wide range of conditions, including depression, anxiety disorders, trauma, even auditory processing differences. All of these fall underneath that neurodivergence umbrella. And you'll be surprised how many people in late adulthood are getting diagnosed now because the signs got missed earlier in their lives, which means that leaders are going to be at the forefront of intervening and ensuring that people feel supported and as though they have the proper accommodations in place to perform their best at work.
Yeah, so this is fascinating to me. And kind of speaking about this, I think, I've had ADD, ADHD forever, right? I had it back when really nobody really knew what it was. And I think it's one of those things, once you understand what you have, you know how to adapt and move around it. But this is actually fascinating because this is a great snapshot here of things that are happening every single day inside of organizations. So I guess the next logical question would be, what are the signs that you can start to see or they're displayed when someone's starting to battle with mental health at work? So how can we be better leaders, or how can we in HR, how can we be able to better identify this to be more proactive with our employees?
Sure. Well, first, I think it's important to recognize the signs within ourselves because so many people, like you, I appreciate you sharing about being diagnosed with ADHD. Because for me, what I thought was just normal behaviors, I used to be like the kiddo in school who would always get great marks, fantastic grades, high achiever, but I would always get comments on my report card that would talk too much or disruptive in class. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought that I'm an extrovert, I'm somebody who is a people person, and that this was within the spectrum of being neurotypical. And it wasn't until just actually 2 years ago, or no, 4 years ago, during the start of the pandemic, when I had to pivot my business, all of a sudden now the 9 to 5 structure was no longer working for me within my workday, and working fully remotely challenged me in a way that I'd never been challenged. So I
Mhm.
remember one day I spoke with my therapist and I was like, at the end of the day, I don't have any energy left. I'm not even able to focus enough to like have a conversation with my husband. Like, what's going on? And she said, I think I've been thinking this for a while, but I think you have adult ADHD. And I think that your executive functioning is kaput at the end of the day. You've used it all up with your client meetings. So I think so many of us, first of all, don't even know what the signs are within ourselves, which make it difficult then to identify them within other people. So some of the things to look out for when it comes to ADHD are going to be difficulties with focus, perhaps some challenges with organization, not necessarily difficulties with achievement. It's just the way that we achieve goals is going to look differently than a neurotypical person. And the
Right.
reason why this is so important is because leaders are going to need to adapt accordingly. Something else that I wanted to make sure that I mention is that we often will think about mental health conditions or neurodivergence looking a certain way, right? So you think about somebody who's struggling with depression as maybe head in hands, overwhelmed, stressed, holed up in their office, they're not engaging with people. But what I find to be more often the case with the corporations I work with is that it's people masking every day at work because they don't feel safe being to like showing that they're struggling. So when you start to notice changes in people's behavior, changes in the way that they communicate with you, subtle shifts, that's going to be more so what mental health conditions are going to look like in the workplace. So an
Oh,
example, if you don't mind going to that next slide.
yeah, 100%. I was going to say there's so many things just to unpack from what you just discussed there. But I think, the one thing, especially for me, is um, I think a lot of people, are discriminated against, to be honest with you, because I'm not a good test taker and never have been, right? But it's like I learn differently. That doesn't mean that it's right or it's wrong, but it's like I think when you have the ADHD, or ADD or whatever, typically you focus on things that you have interest in. And for me, I became interested in sales and marketing at a very young age, and I'm a voracious reader and I love to learn. My mantra is every single day to continue to learn something new. So I never become irrelevant, right? But it's like it took me a long time to be able to understand that it wasn't me, but it was just how I had to adapt and understand things to be more successful with it. And I think in the workplace today, I still think to a certain extent that is misunderstood. And I think a lot of people get overlooked that have tremendous talent because they don't fit the lens that people think they should be in.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there is a bias. There's still a stigma that
Mm.
comes attached with different diagnoses. And often people who are in the position of power to promote somebody or to put them in a position of leadership may view someone, for example, with an anxiety disorder as being unable to tolerate stress, not
Mhm.
able to make decisions under pressure. But it's actually quite the opposite. People with an anxiety disorder often are such forward thinkers. They're the ones that are going to think about all of the different possibilities and outcomes so that they can plan accordingly and address it accordingly. There's a forethought that I find that comes alongside people that may have that diagnosis. Yet so often the assumption is that they're not going to be a good leader because
Yeah.
they just can't handle stress, right? So I think a key component that you're touching on here, Jeff, is that we have to address our own internal biases, our
Mhm.
own assumptions that come with different diagnoses, and that we really have to be mindful of looking for strengths alongside the struggles, to not view people with that are neurodivergent as being deficits, having deficits, but instead to see that they have tremendous assets, so much that they add to the workplace, and that they absolutely can excel in those positions of leadership.
And does that kind of also go into the left brain, right brain aspect of it, where this really falls into, how the individual's wired, and it kind of like looking for the strengths along with the struggles. I don't think you ever get a perfect matrix of somebody has all the attributes. I think it's usually either heavily skewed one to the other. It kind of goes like into whether it's emotional intelligence. Some people struggle with that. It's super high intellect, but they can't relate to people. So it's just a fascinating topic. I don't want to throw us off here, but I think this is so interesting.
Yes. Yes, I do think that there are some neurological differences, right? So, for example, you mentioned something earlier that I think is important to touch on, even from an HR standpoint of like, how do you accommodate somebody who has something like ADHD? Well, you have to understand what ADHD does with the brain, that the dopamine centers need to be activated. The reward system within the brain requires something that's interesting and engaging in order to be activated. So if you put somebody who's exceptional at people skills in a position where they're doing data analytics, and that's not necessarily their strong suit, they're probably going to struggle in that role because it's not giving them the reward of feeling like they're at the top of their game, getting that dopamine hit from having great engagement with somebody. So you have to really understand what people's strengths are in order to accommodate them and put them in roles where they're going to excel, instead of trying to force a square into a round peg, or a square peg into a round slot, or however that saying is.
I love to get this different things, and sometimes I don't know if I do them right or not, but yeah, I know what you mean there.
Yeah.
A square peg in a round hole, I think.
There you go. That's it. That's the one. But yeah, we have to be aware, and that requires you to know your teams.
Yeah.
So something that we were talking about before we got on this live is that often HR leaders have a discomfort, and it's understandable. I get it, because mental health conversations feel sticky. They feel like they can open up liability, that there may be boundary crossing that happens. I'm not supposed to be somebody's therapist. You don't have to be somebody's therapist. I just really want to underscore that. But you do need to have a baseline knowledge and a connection to your teams to where you can understand where some of these strengths and where some of these struggles may come into play, so that you can accommodate accordingly.
100%. So if someone on, like, for example, someone on my team or anybody that's watching, if somebody's on their team, they disclose to them that they're neurodivergent and they're struggling with a mental health case. This kind of like goes right to what we were just talking about. How do you handle that inside of an organization? What is that fine line between what we can control inside of the workplace versus something that a professional would need to address?
Sure. So I think your first steps are going to be lots of curiosity. If somebody discloses something to you, even when you have the baseline knowledge of somebody who maybe is on the autism spectrum, you have to understand that there's no monolith when it comes to these conditions. So we need to understand, how is this affecting the individual, and how are we going to adapt the intervention to meet their specific needs? There's no one size fits all. And that's kind of like the not so good news here. The good news, though, is that if you're able to hone in your curiosity skills, your non-judgmental skills, your question asking, that's going to help to open the door to better understand how their struggles are impacting the way that they work and what might be the most helpful for them. So this particular diagram I love, because it talks about some of the strengths for you to look at. And then in the next slide, we'll get to some of those questions that we can ask. But for example, when we think about somebody with ADHD, your initial judgment is that they're not able to focus, they're disorganized, they're not able to keep on top of their calendar. But if we really look at that condition, we've got creativity, we've got the ability to hyper focus, we've got a great passion that comes into play. So you might ask questions along the lines of, so tell me a bit about, where do you feel like you're thriving in your current role? What are the activities within your role that you feel excited to do, right? Just by asking that question, you're getting a sense of what's going to activate that dopamine reward system for that particular person, so that you can better align the role to meet that. With somebody who's on the autism spectrum, you may assume that they struggle with social interactions, that, they're going to have a difficult time being a team player. But what if instead we viewed it as they've got incredible fine detail processing? A lot of people on the autism spectrum Their ability to see patterns is tremendous. So that's going to shape and form the way that you tailor the role to them and what accommodations you're going to put into place for them, because we want to, once again, play to people's strengths. So go over to that next slide, and then we can get into what do we actually do now.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, so this is what some of the struggles look like. Just to put a nice bow on that, it's not going to look like the overwhelm and stress that you're thinking. It's instead going to be delayed communications. So people that struggle with anxiety are going to be avoidant at times. So if you notice a pattern where on Monday morning, typically this person is responsive, but now it's like 3-4 hours into the day and they're not responding to emails, more than likely when they logged in for the day, they saw 50 different emails that came in between Friday and Monday. And they're just like, oh my gosh, where do I begin? Right. So don't assume that it's because they don't care or that they're intentionally dodging you. It might be that they're overwhelmed and they're a little bit frozen. Sometimes if people have experienced workplace bullying or targeting, which people that are neurodivergent and have mental health conditions tend to be targets, they're going to be the ones that are a little bit more reticent to connect with the team because they're scanning for any potential lack of safety there. That they're going to need to take some time to build trust and psychological safety with their leadership and with their colleagues because they don't want to be judged or harmed again. So this is more so what you're going to be looking out for is some of the more subtle presentations of different conditions. All right, let's go to that next slide.
Okay.
Oh, yep. One more fine point on this. Trauma. I know that this is, people are probably thinking, what does trauma have to do with work? A lot, because all of us at some point in our lives are going to experience something traumatic, whether it's, we go through a car accident, whether it's that we have a parent that's elderly that we're caregiving for that has dementia, right? Whether it's we have a chronic illness. These are all traumas that we may not think of being traumatic. And so the reason why this is so important for leaders to attend to is because it's going to show up in the workplace, because those symptoms don't disappear when people log in for the day. And I'll just underscore one particular one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Jeff. The most common sign that I see at work that somebody may have some early childhood experiences that shaped the way that they show up as an adult is people pleasing. And it's the people who can't say no to assignments, that they feel incredibly guilty. They feel as though there's going to be judgment that's placed on them. And this was me. I am a recovering people pleaser. I have had a hard time being able to say no. And it's because of the fear that if you say no, you'll be deemed as less capable, less competent, less leadership material. And it's rooted in early experiences where you had to abandon your own needs to attend to your caregiver or adults in your lives' needs instead. So that's one I just really wanted to underscore because I see it happen a lot in the workplace.
No, 100%. And I think even for me, the first thing that I learned a long time ago is the power of no, right? And the power of, like, when you have a role and you're focused on whatever your objective is at the end of the day, it's like, where's that delineation of like telling somebody, hey, no, I can't be able to jump in on this because I had this focus, and realizing that you can't be all to everyone at every single moment of the day, and laying out that clear line of delineation. I love this slide, because I think a lot of people, when they hear like PTSD, they think about military, unfortunately, or like some other things, maybe childhood trauma or whatever it would be. This is the workplace. And this is the unfortunate aspect, I think, of what a lot of people are facing today. You and I were obviously talking about it before, especially post-COVID. But I think that it's dramatically underestimated the impact of disassociation and the reasons why. I mean, I've seen so many people come into organizations with, super energetic, super excited, being open and willing to share new things to help, expand out not only their role, but maybe help enhance the organization. And they get this.
Yes.
And they feel like that they're pushed away or they're ridiculed or whatever. And it's so hard because depending on, your journey and other triggers or whatever, you can take a person that's going to be a major impact player inside of your organization and find somebody that is disengaged. And I think we talk about it every single day in this HR space, especially, we were talking about people analytics, right? So it's like a lot of organizations are really struggling at a very high level with turnover. And they're like, well, how did this happen? Here's a great example.
Yes. Yes. And I think that people don't often look at leaving a toxic workplace as being traumatic. I can tell you it's a traumatic experience. If you've had to work within a workplace where you don't feel safe, where you feel targeted, where the burden of your responsibilities supersedes the resources that are available to you. You don't have the emotional support there. You don't feel safe disclosing things to your leadership. If you've experienced bullying, all of these things can be traumatic. It just depends on how you experience them. And I would say that I have worked with just so many different clients who have left toxic work environments, and they're still experiencing the repercussions of being in that type of environment. It's a long-term consequence. Even if it was just a year that you were there, you're still coping with it years later, because it shakes your sense of self. It shapes the way that you perceive safety in the world. And that's what we're looking at when it comes to trauma, is how has your life schema been affected by the events that you've experienced?
100%.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so now let's get into the nitty gritty, right? What do you do? What do you do now? Somebody shares something with you. What are you going to do? So you got to use curiosity to connect. And the reason why this is so important is because, as we were talking about a little while ago, our biases subconsciously are going to frame the conversation, or they're going to frame the perception. So I can't tell you how many leaders I've worked with where somebody's non-responsive to emails, they may be showing up 10 minutes late for a meeting or meetings consistently, and the immediate conclusion that they jump to is that they're just not committed. They're not a good fit for this company. They're not matching our work culture. I can just tell that they're not organized the way that we need them to be organized. Each one of those statements is a judgment, and it's an assumption. We have no information to base that conclusion off of. If we were able to shift the mentality to curiosity, to instead wonder, okay, they're consistently late. I wonder what that might be about. Something must be happening. Let me ask them instead of making the assumption. It would transform. Something that simple would transform the way that you're building relationships with your workforce. And so we just have to be careful and cautious of checking the immediate gut reaction that comes with people behaving in a way that's unexpected. Go to that next slide. And one of the best questions that were so powerful when Oprah and Dr. Dan Siegel, he's a psychiatrist who does a lot of work with neuroscience, they had a conversation, and she talked about this experience where she was at the checkout counter that I think we all can relate to, where you say hi to the person who's checking you out and they just kind of grumble at you. They don't say anything. They're just like, beep, beep, beep. They just are trying to quickly get you out of there. And your initial gut reaction is, God, that person is so rude. Like, geez, what's wrong with them, right? That's the initial reaction. So what if instead, when somebody's struggling, we didn't wonder what's wrong with them? What if instead we were curious and wondered what's happening with them? What might be going on in that person's life? What might be happening in that team member's life where they're consistently 15 minutes late for a meeting? I can tell you, I have seen so many people that have a child with disabilities where they were trying to get them on the bus and it took 15 minutes extra. That's why they were late. Or they're caregiving for a parent who has dementia and the parent was really having a difficult time that morning. So that's why they were 15 minutes late. So if we can open up the conversation and wonder what's happening with them and ask some questions instead of making the assumptions, it's a great jumping off point, and it's a good place to start with creating connection and better understanding how to support people.
No, 100%. And it's one of those type of things where you just mentioned something. I recently went through a family situation where, with the passing of my father last year, and the employer that I was with at the time did give me the space that I needed, and they gave me the support that I needed through that process. And I was still able to effectively do my job at a very high level. But the fact that they were empathetic enough to understand that that is space that a person needs to be able to adapt and adjust. Also, as an employee, it gives you a much different perception of your employer. And there's been other organizations that I've been with where they're like, okay, well, I get it, but how long do you think this is going to take before we can get you back full board? I mean, it's kind of that give and take, and it's like really, I think, developing the empathy to understand that we're all human beings and we're all in the one common goal, but there's these different areas as life has its ebbs and flows where you you need to feel supported.
100%, absolutely. And I'm so sorry for your loss, but you're exactly right. It's that response is going to be a make or break. The way that a people leader engages with somebody who is going through a moment of struggle is going to be a make or break moment, because it's either going to strengthen and establish trust. They're going to be more loyal and committed to your organization because they feel cared for, genuinely empathized with, or it's going to drive them away and they're going to be putting in their resignation shortly after because they don't feel like you care. There was
100%.
actually a time when I was working for an agency where normally I'm punctual, and I've always been a high achiever in my life. And there was a period in my life where I started to struggle with that. I was missing things. I was showing up late for work, things that were out of character for me. And so one day my boss showed up at my job. We worked at a different location. She popped up with a coffee under the guise that I wanted to just bring you a Starbucks and also check in on you. That moment, Jeff, was a break moment for me because I knew exactly what she was doing. This was a gotcha moment. This was a moment of, I want to catch you in this act of being 10 minutes late to your job. This woman never asked me what was going on. And if she had, she would have discovered that my best friend of 10 years had been diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer and was dying. And that was why I was having such a difficult time getting up and being able to function the way that I normally would at work. But there was no inquisitiveness. There was just an automatic assumption and a judgment. And it was just a few months after that interaction that I left that organization after being there for many years, because I didn't have any faith in my leadership any longer. And I genuinely felt like these people don't care about me. I'm a cog in the machine. You just don't want to create a dynamic and an environment within your workplace where that's how people are feeling in their day-to-day lives when they spend 40 hours of their life with you, giving as much as they can to you, So,
100%.
yeah.
So
Okay. Go ahead.
what is attuned leadership, and what are like some skills that I guess that HR leaders can start to practice to get better and to become more engaged around this?
Sure. So the idea of attunement is actually a therapeutic concept that very much applies in the workplace and to any relationship that you have. So attunement simply means a person's ability to be responsive to another person's needs moment to moment. And this concept originates from early childhood development, right? So you think about the way that when a baby cries, if you have an attuned parent, they're going to pick up that baby, they're going to walk around, they're going to pat him on the back, they're going to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" They're going to try to meet that child's needs. If you have a misattuned parent, they're going to be the parent that's like ignoring the child or getting upset with the kid for crying. I'm going to give you something to cry about, right? That's a misattuned response. How that shows up in the workplace is that when you have somebody who comes to you disclosing that they struggle with their mental health, and your immediate response is, "Well, what do we got to do about it?" There's no kindness, there's no validation, there's no normalization. It's just, "Well, but you're struggling and we really need to meet these metrics. So what are we going to do?" That is a misattuned response. And what you're doing in that moment is you're pushing that employee away. You've now you've created a gulf in terms of your relationship with them. So the other piece of attunement that I think is so important for leaders to recognize is that our minds and bodies, we know that they're connected, right? So if you're feeling anxious, it's going to present internally as like your heart racing, your palms getting sweaty, your muscles getting tense, right? We understand that. But what I find many people don't realize is that not only is your mind and body connected, your mind and body is connected to your team's minds and bodies. So the way that you show up in an interaction, if you're showing up with closed body language, if you're literally leaning away as they're sharing something important to you, if you're distracted on your phone responding to emails as they're sitting there disclosing a condition to you, that is a misattuned response. And they're going to once again feel a distrust with you. So in order to attune, we have to check in. And this is my check-in framework that I go over in keynotes that I present to organizations and to events, because there are skills, tangible skills that we can learn that will help to ensure that we're attuned, and therefore that we're creating trust, psychological safety, and accommodations that are going to make sense. So the C stands for connect with questions. This is going to be asking some follow-ups. Tell me more is a great starter. Tell me more about how ADHD affects you in the workplace, Jeff. Tell me more about what's worked for you in terms of organization skills, the way that you set up your schedule, right? Those types of questions are going to open the door. They're going to be open-ended so that the other person can fill in the gaps. And you as a people leader can take notes and start to be thinking about, okay, what's going to need to be the next steps here. As you ask those questions, then you're going to have to do H, which is holding space. This is where some of those body language skills come into play. So you want to make sure that you maintain an open stance. So don't be sitting like this. Even legs crossed is actually a closed body stance, and it subconsciously is going to communicate to the person that you're engaging with that I'm not really interested in what you're saying. This is just a formality, a checking the box. So make sure that you're maintaining a open body stance, and you're going to want to change the tone, the cadence, and just the pacing of your delivery. So when I work with Fortune 500 leaders and they've got a million things on their plate, they'll come to me and they'll say something like, oh my gosh, Nidhi, I'm like feeling very overwhelmed right now. I've got to put together this event. I've got to be able to roll out this new HR software that we're having to implement across the whole organization. I'm trying to also do one-on-ones with my team. They're like at 1,000,000 miles a minute. Da, 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 da. What would happen if I came in and I was like, oh my gosh, that's just so much. What are we going to do? Like I meet them at that same level of anxiety.
Yeah.
That's a misattuned response. So you're going to want to shift the way that you speak. With those clients, they'll be like, oh my gosh, that sounds like so much. You notice how I softened even the tone of my voice, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Subtle things like that are going to make a big difference. And then you're going to want to normalize and validate. So this is going to be letting people know, you know, I understand that you're feeling stressed. I totally get it. I think all of us are feeling stressed right now because we've got deadline coming around the corner and the pressure is on. So you're not alone, right? That's a normalizing and validating technique that helps somebody to feel seen and heard and understood by you. E is going to be exploring supports. So this is going to be another set of open-ended questions. What kinds of accommodations would be the most helpful? Would it be helpful? You may give them a menu of options. Would it be helpful for us to structure your day where from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., you're by your computer and you're responsive to emails? And then outside of those hours, you can plan your day however you want to, right? So I'm going to trust you to be able to just utilize the time and to just, I'll track the outcomes versus the process. Is it helpful for me to check in on you on a weekly basis to just see how things are going? Mm-hmm. So sometimes people don't know what supports they're going to need. And as people leaders, you can provide some options for them to choose from. But this is going to be where you talk about what some of those accommodations can really look like. Is it that they don't have back-to-back meetings and that they have a schedule where they have 15 to 20 minutes between each block of meetings to get up, move around, so they can be fully present for the next block of meetings?
I can totally relate to that because I mean, there's days literally, and I know everybody watching this can relate to it. And it's you know, the new normal, right? It's like we get out of COVID and it's like your calendar is literally blocked hour to hour to hour to hour to hour without no time to eat, no time to take a break. And then to your point, it's like after a certain point, you're there, but you're not there. And I think those 10 to 15 minute breaks in between, and I know I worked with somebody before, she was really great about, I'd always ask her like, why are we doing this at 1:15? And she's like, well, I got to have my little break. And most of us, we block it on either the half an hour or the hour, and we run into that vicious cycle. I think being intentional on how you do schedule your meetings will be able to help somebody be able to adopt into this methodology.
Absolutely. And you have to think about like what is the end result that you're really looking for? Mm-hmm. You're looking for people to show up, be attentive, participative, and be receptive to the information you're providing in that meeting. If their executive functioning is down in the dumps because they've been in 4 1-hour blocks of meetings back to back, the meeting is a moot point. They're not going to come away with what you desire them to come away with. So we have to think about how to set people up for success. And I love the fact that you're incorporating maybe 45 minutes and then 15-minute breaks so that people do get the opportunity to grab a glass of water, use the restroom, step outside to get a breath of fresh air before having to recalibrate themselves for another meeting. Absolutely. Yep. And so then your next C is going to be congruently respond. So once you come to this conclusion of we're going to do 45-minute meetings, 15-minute breaks, now the most important piece is you're going to have to congruently respond, meaning you're going to have to follow through on that. And you're going to have to ensure that you don't drop the ball because people are gauging moment to moment. Are they in alignment with what they say they're going to do and what their actions actually are? So when somebody tells you, I'm going to provide you this accommodation, and then 3 months pass and nothing has changed, they're making a mental note of that.
Mm-hmm.
That, okay, we had this meaningless conversation that was an hour long to do what? To have a conversation about what accommodations I need, and then nothing came of it, right?
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you're congruently responding to people because that's going to be another make it or break it when it comes to trust. And then the last K before we get to the interrupt your discomfort is going to be knowing how to repair, because you're inevitably going to make a mistake. You're going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, drop the ball. It's all good. You're human. Like when I say make it or break it, it does not mean that it's permanently broken. It means that there's a rupture that's happened in the relationship and now we need to repair it.
Mm-hmm.
So the ways that we repair is by acknowledging the misstep, which I've done this before. There was one time where I had told somebody that I was going to follow up with them, and then I dropped the ball. I didn't follow up with them. And they reached back out to me. They circled back to me and they're like, hey, I thought that you were going to send me this document. I never received it. I could have gotten defensive and been like, oh, I've been so busy. Like I didn't get a chance to do it. That's not a repair response, right? Instead, the approach that I took was I acknowledged it. I'm like, thank you so much for your patience. I'm so sorry. I know that I had committed to sending this to you and I dropped the ball. I fully acknowledge that. I validated their feelings. I know that must have been frustrating for you. You were waiting on this document in order to send it off to get to the next step of the process. And here's what I'm going to do differently next time. That's the plan. So we're going to want to make sure that if I'm going to be delayed, I will communicate that to you ahead of time so that we can adjust the plan accordingly. It's that simple. It's just that simple. It's not that complicated, right? Cool. Okay. And then last piece is interrupting your discomfort, because we can't lead other people if we don't lead ourselves first.
Yeah. 100%.
Right? Yeah. So Jeff, you and I were talking about the fact that a lot of leaders avoid conversations about neurodivergence and mental health because of their discomfort. They just don't know what to say. And so then the conversation never happens. And that's actually more destructive than anything, because people will fill in the gaps of information that you do not provide to them. So if you don't initiate a conversation, if you don't discuss mental health and well-being within your workplace, the assumption that people are filling in is that you don't care about it, that it's not a priority in this workplace. So we have to learn skills to interrupt our own discomfort. And that means that when we're sitting down to have a conversation about somebody who is struggling with depression, and we notice that we're starting to pull away, our body language is getting closed off, that we're starting to notice our own anxiety kick up, that we just practice a few tools. One of which is going to be monitoring your breathing. So one of the easiest shifts that you can make that nobody will even know you're using a tool or skill is 4-7-8 breathing, where you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, hold in the breath for 7 seconds, and then do a long exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds. And if you do this 5 or more times, you'll notice that your heart rate slows down, your blood pressure goes down a little bit, the anxiety subsides, you feel a little bit more grounded and present. And one other easy tool that you can use without people knowing is a 5 senses grounding. So you just, like, if you're in conversation with somebody, just like soft gaze past them. You're still paying attention. You're still looking at them, but you're kind of noticing what's happening behind them. And you notice 5 things that you see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And the goal of this is to help you to be grounded and present so that you're not in your head thinking about the next thing to say or worrying about, is this opening me up for a liability or anything like that.
This is amazing. Honestly, this is so good and it's so relatable. And I know every single person that's watching this today can totally get this. If you guys are watching, I know we have a ton of people that are watching right now. If you guys are watching it, you can relate to this, just throw a 1 in the chat, because this is game changing. I mean, not only are we identifying, but we're talking about things to help alleviate probably what many people that are watching this going through every single day. So this is great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I wanted to make it approachable and something that is just small steps, easy steps that we can take to level set, to be able to lay the foundation down to where these conversations become easier to have. And if you can just practice these skills with diligence, and it's going to help to strengthen that muscle, and they honestly apply not only in work relationships but in any interpersonal relationship. It can be a tremendous game changer in terms of your connection with people.
100%. I mean, you and I can like talk all day about this, but so I guess in closing out, talking about the fine line between supporting your team, but then at the same time maintaining the personal boundaries. And then you have this slide here. So let's speak into that a little bit.
Yes, the biggest concern I hear from HR leaders that I work with is that I'm not somebody's therapist. Like, I don't know how to have this conversation and still maintain a boundary, right? What is the boundary? Well,
Mm-hmm.
the boundary is that you need just enough information for you to be able to understand what the accommodations are, right? And outside of that, it's okay to refer people to the resources that you have within your organization, whether that's your EAP, whether that's going to be a different leader who specifically works with accommodations, right? Like, there's going to be different people within your teams that are going to be perhaps the next step after you have the initial conversation. So I just want to underscore that one more time, that the intention here is not for you to be a mental health expert, for you to provide guidance or therapy to people to solve their problems. That's not what you're expected to do. What you're expected to do is to have enough of an empathetic, compassionate conversation with people to where you get a grasp of how is this specifically impacting the way that they show up in the workplace, and what's going to be helpful for them going forward so that they can perform at their highest level. So sometimes people are going to try to push those boundaries. For example, they're going to share information with you and they're going to say, okay, so what are we going to do now? I need to know what the next steps are.
Mm-hmm.
You can say something like, I'll need some time to process this information and I'm going to circle back with my thoughts. This is going to buy you some time. You don't have to give an immediate response to people. And it does tell them what the next step is, which is, I'm going to circle back. So you kind of close the loop there. When you are an HR leader or people leader and you get information, sometimes other people within the teams are going to try to press you for more information about that person's specific diagnosis. So somebody shares with you that they have ADHD, and now all of a sudden a team lead is wanting to know the ins and outs of their diagnosis, and I need to know everything about what they shared with you.
Mm-hmm.
You have a responsibility to protect their personal health information, their PHI, per HIPAA. So you may say something along the lines of, I'm not able to share the specifics of this individual's condition, but I'll let you know once the plan is finalized, and I will share with you what the plan for accommodations are. Right. So that's a way to dodge like the HIPAA breach that people are going to try to place on you, because it's out of their own curiosity and their own desire to want to know more, but it's not appropriate for you to share. Another one is that as people leaders, there's a lot on y'all's plates. Like, you're not just doing like the people analytics. You're not just doing like the behind the scenes stuff. You're also having these heavy conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So your leadership may try to put something else on your plate during a week of accommodations meetings and mental health conversations. So you may say something along the lines of, I wish I could help with this, but I just don't have the bandwidth to take that on right now. I will keep you posted about when I will have some availability to add that to my plate, right? So it's okay. Going back to what we were saying earlier, it's okay to say no. There are ways to say no to your bosses without it coming across as you not caring about your role or trying to dodge responsibility.
Totally.
Yeah. If somebody is trying to, at the end of the day, like what we call doorknob confessionals, right? Where they walk in at the end of the day, they're like, I've got something to share with you. You can say, I'm happy to touch base tomorrow, but I'm unavailable for the rest of the day. It's like, protect your time and your energy, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So be sure that you're gauging where you are emotionally. And if it's a day where it's been heavy, it's okay for you to circle back with people the next day and take the time off. And that ties in nicely with the last statement, which is going to be, I've had some heavy conversations come up this week, so I'm going to be taking off some time to engage in some good self-care. This is powerful for two reasons. One, because you are prioritizing your own well-being, which is critical. We need you and your longevity in this field. But two, you're also modeling for other people what's acceptable. So when as people leaders, you loudly communicate that you're taking a mental health day, you've now given permission to other people to also communicate to you that they need the mental health day. So remember, the culture begins with you and your leadership teams, and we've got to set the tone in what's permissible within the workplace.
100%. This has been incredible. And I think it's something, at least from my perspective, most organizations are not trained on. No. So with that being said, if someone has enjoyed this today, or someone maybe they're happened to run into this and they're continuing to run into inside their organization, and maybe they want to work with you, here is a QR code here. I would strongly recommend scan the QR code, connect with Nitty. This is something that will literally change the game. And if you're going to make any investment in 2024, and we talk about it at Predictive HR all the time, your people are your most valuable asset. And my recommendation would be, you can kind of do a 1-2 punch, right? I think first and foremost, you can only grow what you can measure. So you need to understand, as an organization, you need to look at the metrics and look at the trends. And if you're having challenges with attrition, or your turnover, either through your talent acquisition or whatever areas you're seeing consistencies with, first and foremost, you need to be able to identify those. Then I think what you need to be able to do is you bring in somebody like Nitty that can look at your organization, maybe do an intake, find out what's working, what's not, but really train you, because I can tell you today and the years moving forward, everything that we talked about today is going to become more and more relevant, and you're going to have a better pulse on how to be able to take care of your folks, understand neurodivergence, understand how to identify different areas, and support your people. So with that being said, again, scan the QR code there. Nitty would love to be able to talk to you and figure out how you guys could work together. And I got to tell you, this has been awesome. I think you and I will probably maintain a friendship moving forward. Gosh, I've learned so much from you. So I'm going to give you the honor and the benefit today of closing out this session of HR Disruptors. And I want you to talk about 3 core things to the audience today that they can take from this and start right now.
Yes, thank you so much again for having me. It was truly an honor. I loved our conversation. The 3 biggest takeaways that we can have is, 1, challenge your biases and your assumptions. Look within and look at what the narratives are culturally from your family system around mental health and well-being, because we all grew up with different messaging. So you need to examine that. 2 is be able to operate from a place of curiosity instead of judgment. Don't make assumptions. Instead, ask open-ended questions and start to be able to gauge what's really going on with your teams, because it'll build relationships with them and it'll teach you how you can prioritize their well-being. And then the 3rd piece is for you to be able to learn that check-in framework, because that tool, that framework is going to arm you with the skills so that you can have these conversations and with the language, the words to say, so that it opens up a discussion where people feel seen and heard.
There you have it, straight from the mouth. Nitty, thank you so much for this today. This has been so awesome. And again, tune in next week for another episode of HR Disruptors. And again, reach out to Nitty. I'm going to put one more time on here. Oh, there it is. You want to contact her, smash the code, scan the code, do whatever you want to do. We'll see you next week on HR Disruptors. Thank you so much.
Thank you.